Ever wonder what the future of work will look like? In the Hope at Work podcast, you will be exposed to new workplace norms, modern technologies, and unconventional ideas, all from a positive point of view. You'll never look at work the same way again. Hello and welcome to the Hope at Work podcast. My name is Marcus Mossberger. I am joined today by Joe O'Connor, the CEO of Work Time Reduction. Joe, welcome to the podcast. I have to tell you, I have been following this concept of the 4-day week for years. I have been a huge advocate, a huge proponent. How did you get involved in this stuff?
Marcus, it's a pleasure to join you. I first got interested in the concept of a shorter work week back in 2018 in Ireland, which is where I'm originally from. We were doing some research within the Irish Public Service looking at work time, work-life balance, childcare, a whole load of related issues. But a discovery that really has stuck with me ever since is we uncovered that we had a lot of working parents, mostly women, who had already voluntarily reduced their hours to better accommodate other commitments and responsibilities outside of work. It's quite common for, people to move down to 4 days when they return from maternity leave, for example. But when we started looking a bit deeper into this, we found that actually their job responsibilities and expectations were largely unchanged from when they were working 5 days. And the productive output that they were actually achieving was the same as their 5-day colleagues in almost every instance. Really got me fascinated with this concept, Parkinson's law, that a task expands to fill the time that's available for its completion. Started looking into some of the early studies, trials, research on the 4-day work week in Scandinavia and in New Zealand, and then eventually launched an initiative on this in Ireland before the pandemic.
I think the pandemic maybe instigated some of that change because I think it loosened some people's perceptions of what's possible at work because we were forced to do things we never thought we would have to do. So when we talk about the 4-day work week, Joe, maybe talk a little bit more about how you all define it, because a lot of folks think, oh, you're just trying to fit in 40 hours into 4 days.
Sure. And the reason our organization is called Work Time Reduction is very deliberate, because often it may not be a 4-day work week. How we define the concept is very much around reduced work time, so a genuine reduction in work time, not compressed hours, for the same salary, but in exchange for a commitment to maintaining the same or a greater level of business outcomes. And obviously that assumes an increase in hourly productivity. When we talk about reduced work time, this is as much about changing the way that people work as it is about changing the number of hours that they spend at work. And it's actually about figuring out how can we do better work more efficiently rather than do the same work quicker. So in many ways, this is a work redesign project, and it really requires everyone in the organization to commit themselves to process improvement, to innovation, to figuring out how can we achieve the same goals in a more efficient way.
Why do you think we as humanity should spend less time working?
I think at an individual level, this is something that can transform people's quality of life. And we've seen so many incredible stories about the life-changing transformative benefit this has had for people in terms of freeing them up to spend more time with family, for caring responsibilities, learning new skills, hobbies, pursuits and endeavors that they wouldn't otherwise have been able to do. I think often overlooked, it can actually really transform people's quality of work, because the process involved here is really all about how do we make sure that the time that people are spending at work is most closely aligned to the things that move the needle on value, on goals, on strategy. So actually that process of identifying where are the areas where we're inefficient, where are the areas that people maybe aren't operating top of license, maybe aren't spending as much time as possible doing the things that they're uniquely qualified to do. And I think lastly, we've seen what happens when people feel left behind by major technological advancement, by globalization. And I would argue that as we head for a future of work that's going to be defined by more incredible exponential developments in terms of artificial intelligence and new technologies, it's really vitally important that we share the benefits of those productivity gains with the workforce. And I feel like reduced working time is a really good place to start.
Love it. Okay, so if you think back to the days of Henry Ford, my understanding is people were working 60 plus hours a week, six, days a week. And so he reduced it to that 5-day, 40-hour week with the goal of, to your point, getting people to be more productive. And it worked. But I also heard that one of his reasons for doing it was he also wanted to give people more time to be consumers, to buy his cars, to drive his cars around. So there's another additional element of why we want to do this, so we can all go spend more money. Do you agree, Joe?
There are a whole host of consequences around this. And interestingly, there's a big debate around, would a 4-day work week have positive environmental implications because people will commute less, will have less energy use in buildings, people will be more freed up to be able to spend more time and energy on sustainability, on making the changes in their lives and in their communities that will really help us address the major climate challenge? Or will they do as you've described? Will they actually start to consume more, fly more, and will that actually have negative environmental consequences? And I feel reduced work time is something that I think can be a major complementary force, but it needs to sit alongside other policy interventions. In other words, there needs to be disincentives away from those kinds of highly carbon intensive activities if reduced work time is going to have that positive impact environmentally that certainly all of us involved in this space are very hopeful that it will.
Hi, I'm Cole Napper, host of Directionally Correct, the #1 people analytics podcast in the world. Come check out our podcast that dives deep into topics like people analytics, workforce planning, and talent intelligence, helping leaders across the globe navigate the future of work with insight and a little bit of fun.
Yeah, great point. So you mentioned earlier, this isn't just about changing how long people work, but it's also about changing how they work. How do you think generative AI in particular may have our ability to fast forward some of these pursuits, or do you think it will delay it? What are your thoughts?
I think if you take the hundreds of organizations at this point that I've worked with in the past 5 to 6 years to help them reduce their work time, very commonly they will use technology in certain ways to automate certain tasks, streamline certain administrative processes. And I would argue that the scope and the potential for that has increased exponentially just in the last 12 months alone with some of the developments we've seen in terms of Gen AI and large language models. If you look at what we project will happen in the years to come, that's only going to continue to fast forward. It's very likely that the tools that are available to us today will probably look more like the BlackBerry of AI than the Apple of AI in the years to come. I absolutely think that AI can help enable organizations to create the capacity needed to reduce work time. But on the flip side, I also believe that reduced work time can be a really powerful incentive to motivate employees, teams, and organizations to adopt new technologies and to integrate things like AI into their day-to-day work. For a lot of performers, they feel like the only reward for us finding new creative ways to become more efficient, to innovate, to improve processes is creating space for more work. And often the people who actually get loaded with more tasks and more responsibilities because they're seen as the go-to people. So I think this is about creating a framework where everyone is incentivized to find ways to work better and everyone shares in the reward.
Absolutely. Yeah, you're totally right. The reward for being hyper productive and efficient is more work. And that shouldn't necessarily be the case. I don't know if you realize this. 80% of the world's workforce is deskless, shift-based frontline workers. And yet so much of what we do doesn't cater to that workforce. Are there specific industries or sectors this is going to be really hard? I hear healthcare say, oh, we can't do that. I completely disagree, but I'm curious to hear your thoughts.
I think it's true to say that there are certain industries where this will be a heavier lift than others. I think it's also true to say that there are certain industries that may become early adopters of this quicker. If you look back to Henry Ford's time, manufacturing and industrial sectors were where the power base of the economy lay, and therefore they were the driving force of this. If you look at where the power base of economies lies today, it is more in technological employment, white-collar work. And I think in line with that, we're seeing greater momentum there. But if you take healthcare as a really good example, there's no question that even on the debate around AI and how we use technology, there are a lot of hours invested in administrative processes whereby technology could really help to release capacity and unlock time and efficiency. However, I would not argue that you can treat nurses, doctors, hospital consultants, other frontline healthcare professionals in the same way as maybe I would work with a professional services firm, where it's about how can we work less and get more done with the same workforce? How do we produce the same outcomes in less time? I don't believe that that's necessarily directly applicable in a healthcare setting. However, what I would argue is that if you look at most of the macro trends around AI, around the climate transition, one of the areas that most macroeconomists are very clear that we need to invest in is the caring economy. This is an area that there will need to be more jobs in the future. So I think against that backdrop, investing in increasing headcount, reducing hours, and creating better outcomes for both staff and for patients, I think is actually a very compelling vision for where we should be going with our healthcare services in the future.
Yeah, I really like the compelling vision that you just portrayed, Joe. So I know that you've done a lot over the years that you mentioned earlier, working with a wide variety of organizations, doing pilots and programs. What are some of the tangible results that you've seen coming out of those that you can share with us?
Most of our day-to-day work today is working with larger, more complex organizations to help them figure out how they can make this transition to reduced work time. But prior to that, I led a number of large-scale pilot programs, both here in North America, also in the UK and Ireland. We had about 105 companies take part in a pilot program in 2022. It was a 6-month coordinated trial of the 4-day work week. And I think the most incredible outcome from that was that 95% of the businesses across a wide range of different industries decided to stick with the work time reduction policy at the end of the trial period. Which I think is in and of itself a reflection of the success that they experienced with this. What we found in these trials overwhelmingly was that employees were happier and healthier. They were leading to more productive, efficient organizations, and those same organizations were finding it much easier to attract and retain talent.
Okay, so the Work Time Reduction Center of Excellence that you've created, how do you work with organizations and how can they get started?
Sure. So we typically follow a 4-phase process. We will start with what we call a discovery phase. And that's really all about helping us to understand the organization and its people, understand their capacity and readiness to reduce work time without impacting their business outcomes. At the end of that, if the organization decides to move ahead, we would do a planning and preparation phase, which is quite training oriented, really about attacking the obvious inefficiencies like overlong meetings, distractions in the work environment, poor use of technology or outdated processes, helping us to uncover some of the less obvious efficiencies. So really giving people this incentive to figure out what are the frustrations and the bottlenecks within our work that we can actually address. And people are very focused and motivated to engage with that process because the potential gain at the end of it for everyone in the organization is so great. And then a big part of it when you get to the actual transition itself is how do we embed these new practices, these new habits, these new behaviors so that they become norms? Because if you've been practicing bad habits in terms of your meetings for your entire career, a couple of training workshops probably aren't going to land that change for good. So it really is about linking this very much to being a continuous improvement process.
Okay, Joe, if you think of it on a spectrum, there's work-life balance on one side of the spectrum, where we want to keep our personal and professional lives separate and distinct. The other end of the spectrum is work-life integration, where you're like, hey, there's no distinction between my personal and professional. It all just melds together. Does the work time reduction concept fit more toward one of those spectrums, or can it fit in either of them?
I think that's a great question. I would say that the first model in most job types today is probably unrealistic. So this idea that there's a complete and true separation between work and life. I feel like the other concept in its purest form, where there's no break at all, is pretty dystopian as far as I'm concerned. I feel like this is linked to the debate around the right to disconnect. A number of governments have brought forward legislation on this. And in a way, it's the kind of thing which is really well-intentioned. However, if it's implemented in organizations in and of itself, I think it's trying to address the symptom rather than the cause. The key is managing boundaries and expectations. So understanding when are the times where we expect our people to flex. Where are the areas where we need to have a little bit of wiggle room, and where are the areas where we need to ensure that people are protected and people have that ability to be able to switch off from their day-to-day work.
Yeah. So, okay, last question, Joe. When is this going to happen?
I would say the good news is that this will continue to grow in the coming 5 to 10 years. Even if it's not the norm, it will be much more normal than it is today. I don't know if we'll ever get to a point where the 4-day 9 to 5 becomes as common as maybe the 5-day 9 to 5 was post Henry Ford. I think it's too soon for this to become a mandatory requirement of employers. But I do feel like this is something that maybe won't just happen across the economy if it's entirely left to the market.
Very pragmatic perspective. I appreciate that. Joe O'Connor, CEO of Work Time Reduction. I am so thankful that you joined our podcast today. Would love to stay connected and see how things evolve over the next few years. So thank you again for your time, Joe.
Great to join you, Marcus.